Hi guys, so today we have a updated 2018 governor forecast. We'll briefly go through all the governorships that are up, not all of them, but the competitive races. So last time we had it at 25 Democrats, 25 Republicans, which means it was a tie. Now, looking very briefly at each of them, we have the Oregon governor race. The polling suggests that it could get pretty close, but overall Kate Brown is likely to go on and be elected, leaning Democratic. Next, we have Nevada, Steve Sisolak versus Adam Laxalt. New CNN polling shows Sisolak with a 4-point lead. Gravos polling shows him with a 12-point lead. That's probably an outlier, but overall it's looking pretty positive for Steve Sisolak to go on and be the next governor of Nevada. In the state of Arizona, Doug Ducey versus David Garcia. New Fox News polling shows Ducey with an 18-point lead over David Garcia. That's unprecedented. I'm going to keep it in the likely Republican column. The only reason I'm not putting it in the safe Republican column is because maybe Kristen Sinema could drive out a bit more Democratic turnout, but still it's probably going to go to the Republicans. Now, looking at Colorado, Jared Polis versus Walker Stapleton. The only poll we have shows the Democrat with a 7-point lead. That's pretty good for him, and I'm keeping it in the leaning. Someone could make the argument that it's likely, but I'm keeping it in the leaning Democratic column. Looking at the polling data from the New Mexico governor race, we have the Democrat consistently leading. I'm actually going to move it from the leaning Democratic column to the likely Democratic column, so that's a almost definite pickup for them in the state of New Mexico. In Kansas, Chris Kobach versus Laura Kelly. Polling has consistently shown this within the margin of error. And for that reason, I think I'm going to narrowly. It's really weird because the Republican poll, Remington Research, shows the Democrat ahead. Then the two Democratic polls shows the Republican ahead. So, pretty funny. But anyway, I'm going to keep it. Actually, I'm actually going to move it into the tilting Republican column. Just because I think that I believe, yes, Greg Orman could drive out some Republicans to vote for him instead of for Chris Kobach in there. Okay, now we're looking at the Oklahoma governor race, Kevin Stitt versus Drew Edmond. Last poll we had shows the Republican up 3. That's pretty good news for him going into the general election. I'm going to keep it in the leaning Republican column. I'm not putting it in the likely Republican column because the incumbent governor there is extremely unpopular, Mary Fallin. Very, very unpopular with the people of Oklahoma. In Georgia, we have Brian Kemp versus Stacey Abrams. New polls show Kemp leading with a tie, and then Abrams, then Kemp. So, very close race in the state of Georgia. It's going to come down to the wire, but I think I'm going to put it in the tilting Republican column. Looking at the state of Florida, we have Andrew Gillum versus Ron DeSantis. Quinnipiac shows Gillum with a 9-point lead. Then WCTV shows him with a 1-point lead. Mason-Dixon shows him with a 1-point lead. Very close race, however, I'm going to keep it in the leaning Democratic column. I just want to touch on something very briefly here. I don't think him campaigning with Hillary Clinton was a good idea for him at all. He should have stuck to his progressive message, then that he could have led 5 or 4% into the election day, but now it's coming down back to 1%. So just something to note there. In Maryland, Larry Hogan versus Ben Jealous. Ben Jealous not doing too well. Larry Hogan, 15-point lead, and that's why I'm keeping it in the likely Republican column. There we go, likely Republican. In the state of Minnesota, Jeff Johnson versus Tim Walz. People say that the Republican will keep this close going into the election day. He hasn't. The Democrat has consistently lead in the upper single digits range. I'm going to put this in the leaning Democratic column. In the state of Wisconsin, this is one that the Republicans had hoped, but it doesn't look too positive for them anymore. Tony Evers leads by 5 points in a New Marquette poll. He leads by 2 points in a Suffolk poll. He leads 5 points in a public policy polling poll. He leads by 7 points in an Emerson poll. He leads by 13 points in a NBC News poll the last time Scott Walker led was in back in June, so not too good, not looking too good for Scott Walker there. I'm going to keep it in the Tilt Democratic column. In Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer versus Bill Stewart. New polls show Gretchen Whitmer leading in the likely range. This is called the likely range. I'm going to keep it in the leaning Democratic column. If we have a few more polls that put it at a double-digit lead, I could consider moving it into the likely Democratic column. In the Iowa governor race, we have 2 polls showing the Democrat ahead. The poll that shows the Republican ahead was taken in January, so that's why I am disregarding it. But none of the candidates are really reaching that 50% mark. They don't really have much of a base, so that's very interesting. I'm keeping it in the Tilt Democratic column. In Ohio, the governor race, Mike DeWine versus Richard Cordray. New polls show a dead heat. I'm going to keep it in the Tilt Democratic column, considering there were 2 polls before it that shows a Democratic lead. In Connecticut, Bob Stefanowski versus Ned Lamont. Polling shows Ned Lamont is doing very, very well. I'm going to actually move Connecticut from tilting Democratic to leaning Democratic. In the state of Rhode Island, Alan Fung versus Gina Raimondo. Again, this is going to keep in the leaning Democratic column, not much to see there. And finally, in the state of Maine, the only poll that we have is Suffolk poll that shows a dead heat, 39 to 39, not many, quite a lot of undecided voters. I'm going to keep it in the leaning Democratic column. So actually, the overall composition hasn't changed. It's just that New Mexico went from leaning Democratic to likely Democratic. Kansas went from leaning Republican to tilt Republican. And Connecticut went from tilting Democratic to leaning Democratic. So thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I'll see you all in the next one.